you for joining us. Whether you are a CLWA member or a first-time visitor to our annual program. These last few years have been rather unusual and have taught me a few things. One, this lake might just be the perfect place to ride out a pandemic. Two, that we can stay connected with new technology and really Zooming isn't so hard, and that we are capable of adapting to change. Some changes we have control over and some we do not. We did not have control over the introduction of COVID-19 and the subsequent challenges it created, including lockdowns and isolation. We do not have control over the fact that our climate is changing, but we do have control over how we respond to the issues that hasten the impacts of a warmer world. How might we do that? By seeking out the true experts, by learning more about the factors threatening clean water, and by making personal choices that can make our community better, healthier, and safer. We here at CLWA strive to help you with the first two, seeking professional expertise and sharing what new research uncovers about the contributors impacting the health of the watershed and of Canandaigua Lake. Many of you have already taken the first step. During this year, you have continued to support CLWA and share our mission. Next slide. Thanks. Enabling CLWA to achieve more than we imagined we ever could have, especially considering 2021 was the second of a 2-year pandemic. We are most grateful for your generosity. The Canandaigua Lake Watershed wrong notes. In 2021, we also realized an uptick in membership. Our reinvigorated business membership drive reached a new high, which you'll hear about a little more later. Our new committees, education and government relations, also really hit the ground running this year. We're not done, however. You may not yet know, but today the first cyanobacterial bloom, or HABs, was observed on Canandaigua Lake. Visually, that is, samples were taken, and we'll keep you posted on whether the bloom meets or exceeds the threshold for toxicity. This spring, we moved from the first small office CLWA ever occupied to a much larger space with 3 windows and a glass door. Why? Because we have big dreams and concrete goals. We have incredibly enthusiastic volunteers, including our 15 board members and additional committee chairs. We have an awesome staff, Lindsay McMillan, Lindsay Ayers, and this year, Sammy Jocelyn. And we need more people to hear, understand, and live our mission. While we have made great strides in implementing our strategic plan goals, we cannot achieve them all without a little bit more help. Might you consider volunteering with outreach and special events? Maybe you have a background in entomology or just like bugs. We need a champion for our terrestrial invasives committee, or hydrology. Or do you have another skill set that might really help CLWA reach our goals? Please call us, send an email, or stop by our new office. We'd love to talk about your ideas for change right here in the Canandaigua Lake Watershed. A few minutes ago, I mentioned true experts. Well, we have 1 or 2 with us tonight. As you can see by the agenda, we have a lot to cover, so let me hand the screen off to our brilliant and dedicated association director, Lindsay McMillan.
Well, thank you, Lynn. That's quite an intro. Welcome, everyone, and we really want to thank you for participating this evening. As Lynn mentioned, I'm Lindsay, and I'm the association director here at CLWA. And my role here means I often end up wearing a lot of different hats to support the great work of the association. But one of my greatest pleasures is getting to work with our just wonderful and dedicated board of directors, our volunteers, our staff, our members. We really appreciate your continued support. And I just want to take a brief moment to recognize Lynn for all of her efforts in her first year of presidency at CLWA. She's really helping to shape the future direction of the association. So thank you, Lynn. When we reflect over the last year, a big focus for CLWA has been the launch of our 3-year strategic plan. So at the time of last year's annual meeting, we were kind of just getting our feet off the ground, and the plan had just been adopted a few months prior. So when we sit down to think about what we have to share with you in our limited time tonight, we really just wanted to focus on what's new with CLWA. Because in addition to our ongoing projects, we've taken some big steps to help build our capacity so that we can make meaningful impacts on existing and emerging threats to the watershed. So tonight we're going to mainly focus on some of our newer actions and these three kind of key focus areas that we've outlined here: our work in community engagement and education, our efforts in citizen science, and building strong partnerships. By us focusing on these three areas in the first year of our strategic plan, we're really trying to lay the framework for some really exciting projects in the near future. So starting off with community engagement. One of our most visible programs has been the Watershed Education Program, and this is co-funded by CLWA and the Canandaigua Lake Watershed Council. And this is an award-winning program that really just aims to empower students through engaging lessons that teach about how land use has an impact on water quality. And the ultimate goal here is to create lifelong watershed stewards that continue to protect our local environment for the future generations. So new additions to the program this year, we welcome some changes. Lindsay Ayers, who some of you may know from her role here as administrative coordinator at the CLWA office, she's moved up and taken on role as the lead educator, and she's coordinating the whole program along with her two dedicated watershed educators here. We also welcomed educator Lynn Oker, whom many of you may know through her role at FLCC and the Canandaigua City School District, great addition to the program. And we're really thrilled to also welcome Kathy Canizio to the program this year. And she's bringing expertise in early childhood curriculum development. And she's done some really interesting background work in program development, working with the well-known children's show Sesame Street. So really interesting backgrounds that are helping advance this initiative. So what else is new with the education program this year? Well, as Lynn mentioned, we've had COVID going on. So after a few years of limited access to in-person activities, our educators are really happy to get back in the classroom for some hands-on lessons. This program is really designed to be interactive and offer hands-on opportunities for learning so students can really make those connections. We also launched a new education committee this year and added a few just incredibly skilled volunteers to the team. One I would like to recognize tonight is our volunteer, Doug Llewellyn, who has been working on developing a new watershed curriculum for a higher grade level for middle and high school, which is going to be piloting this year and with 2 teachers in some of our watershed districts. Kathy Canizio also developed an early childhood curriculum for younger grade levels, which was very warmly received in multiple districts. And brand new this week, just launching on Monday under the guidance of Lynn Oker, we started the Water and Wildlife Summer Camp at Ononda Park. And this is also focused on a higher grade level, that's 6th through 8th grade. So all of these new things have led to an increase in our programming to 3,100 students this past year. That's more than, I want to say almost triple than 2021. And it's our highest number of students to date. So thank you to this great team for expanding and reaching new audiences. Okay, another major cornerstone for CLWA and our community engagement is our educational outreach activities. These are put together by our outreach committee led by Chairperson Sonia Carnevale. And each year we really strive to bring new topics of interest to the forefront. And we get this based on feedback from our members, what they want to hear, what they want to know about, and by also following emerging concerns like new invasive species to the area. So after a couple of slow years with activities due to the pandemic, we were back in full force this year, hosting really just a banner year. We had 27 events and workshops, and we reached over 1,230 attendees. So that is a lot of touch points in the community. And these activities range from rain barrel workshops, we had invasive species talks, guided hikes. And this year we're trying to expand our reach by participating in several of the local arts festivals as well. This gives us a really kind of new opportunity to reach residents, visitors to the area, and offer ways to get involved in watershed protection. But by far, one of our biggest undertakings this year, as Lynn alluded to earlier, has been our big move to Mill Street in downtown Canandaigua. And this space is really becoming a hub for our members, our volunteers, and also just the greater community. People are always stopping by to learn more about our activities, wanting to get more involved. So having a presence in the community, I think, is really going to help support our future growth, and we're really excited about it. In addition, we finally have the space to host trainings for our citizen science programs. We can have group meetings here, and we have a potential to have more in-person small scale workshops in this space. So on the horizon for us to build out this community space is to help support our growing research programs, including the potential for a dedicated science counter here, which would be equipped with everything we need to help accept and process water samples and support our citizen science programs. So if you're in the neighborhood, we would love it if you would stop by. There's been so many people involved with this move, but I want to give a special thanks to our board of directors and especially our board president, Lynn, for her vision and persistence for really making this move become a reality. And so much of our community engagement is about just this opportunity to interact with residents and businesses and our different stakeholders, just to make some meaningful connections. But times are changing, and we recognize that electronic communication is also an important component for sharing our mission and reaching new audiences. And from my perspective, we have a strong responsibility to create a new pipeline of clean water supporters. And this translates into finding ways to help connect our mission with younger generations as well. And as a nonprofit, how do we do that? Well, we have to meet people where they're at. And in many cases, that's on social media and through electronic means. So here on the screen, you'll see a short list of some of the ways that we're trying to connect with the Watershed community. Our e-newsletter list continues to grow each year. And actually, as of this morning, we're up to 1,736 subscribers, averaging 31 new signups each month. That's huge. And we're also seeing an open rate on our emails and water quality updates of between 53 and up to 75% in some cases, which is kind of unheard of in the nonprofit industry, which has an average standard of around 25%. So people that sign up and follow us, they're interested and they're actually engaging, and that's good news to us. So thanks to our Savvy Communications team, Katrina Bush is our communications chairperson, and our new CLWA community engagement coordinator, Sammy Jocelyn, for all that they do to help us deliver hopefully clear, effective communications and drive successful campaigns. So one thing that I thought was pretty noteworthy this last year has been the transition to LED flares instead of the traditional incendiary flare. So this was a campaign that involved some direct mailings, social media, and I like to think it was a huge success, with Wegmans selling over 6,600 flares this year, LED flares. So that translates into a real water quality benefit. So that's just one key example of how clear, effective communications can work in our watershed community. So now that we've shared information on our engagement projects, we're going to shift to another big focus area for CLWA, our citizen science programs. So here is a couple of images of some of our volunteers in action, and you may recognize some of these faces here as neighbors and friends in the coming slides. So just why have we been getting involved in supporting more water quality research? Well, as Lynn mentioned earlier, our lake is changing, and we know that some new threats are emerging. In less than a decade, we've started experiencing harmful algal blooms, which are impacting not only our use of the lake, but potentially the health of our drinking water source. So in response, our great citizen science committee, led by just our dynamo chairperson, Sally Napolitano, have been actively seeking ways to help us better understand the state of our lake. And this is done in collaboration with so many of our state, regional, and local partners like the Canandaigua Lake Watershed Council. So here on the right, you're going to see a list of our ongoing water quality projects. These are every year we run these programs and projects to learn more and better understand what's going on in our watershed. And they're collecting not only important data to document trends, but they're helping us educate the community and ultimately giving us data to advocate for lake health in the future. So just quick outline here on the right, the Shoreline Harmful Algal Bloom Program now has 67 volunteers monitoring zones around the lake. Our Secchi Disc program has 18 sites where volunteers are collecting water clarity and surface water temperatures. Tonight, you might hear our presenter, Tony Prestigiacomo, reference the DEC CSLAP program, which is a state recognized program for water chemistry sampling. In 2021, we launched an E. coli stream monitoring project, and this is looking at fecal contamination levels in local streams. Although it's been a couple of dry years in a row now, so opportunities for sample collection have been somewhat limited, although tonight would have been a perfect night to go out. Working with our partners at the Finger Lakes Institute, we've got volunteers out scouting for invasive species. And this year we're continuing a project with Dr. Ruth Richardson of Cornell University and Dr. Lisa Kleckner of the Finger Lakes Institute on DNA research of both bloom and non-bloom waters. So these programs that you see here all take just a tremendous amount of coordination and dedication and involve many different partners and volunteers. So we do this because the science is evolving and data collection techniques are evolving. And by having more eyes on the lake, we're able just to provide a more robust data source that contributes towards all of this ongoing research. And the benefit also is that these programs are helping us assess lake conditions in near real time, which is allowing us to get good science-backed information out to the community, which is really the role of a lake association. So those were our ongoing programs. We're going to highlight just 2 new activities this year under our citizen science team. So previous HABs monitoring efforts have provided us with some really great information on harmful toxin levels in the water, but didn't necessarily differentiate between groups of cyanobacteria or classes of those cyanotoxins in the water. And this is important to understand to help us answer the question, are all the blooms that we're seeing on the lake the same lake-wide? So starting as a small pilot project between Sally Napolitano and Dr. Greg Boyer last year of SUNY ESF, we built on that pilot project and this year expanded a program to include 6 strategically placed locations around the lake, 3 on the east side and 3 on the west side. We're doing routine weekly sampling, and this is tracking changes in the algal community over time and space. So samples are collected and analyzed in both non-bloom and bloom conditions for chlorophyll, blue-green algae content, and toxins. And in addition, at each sampling site, volunteers are taking images of their samples using what you see in the bottom right here, which is an iolite microscope. It connects to a cell phone with a signal. It's pretty neat. So these images that are captured of the bloom and non-bloom waters are sent to the ESF lab, and the algal species are being identified. So this is hopefully going to provide us with a much clearer and much more comprehensive picture of the nature of the threats posed by these algal blooms. And more importantly, how we might target projects in the future to help reduce impacts from HABs. So this is a relatively new program this year. We've got some great volunteers participating, and we're looking forward to sharing more information on this project in the coming months. Okay, another new project in 2022, spearheaded by Citizen Science Committee member Joel Pasternak. As Lynn mentioned earlier, the impacts from climate change are really just a persistent threat to our water resources. And we're trying to better understand if the trend in warming surface water temperature is also translating to warmer water throughout the water column. So with some simple research, Joel was able to find a relatively inexpensive way for several of our Secchi Disc volunteers to start recording and tracking water temperature at 1 meter intervals down to 50 meters. So here on the bottom left, you'll see a fish hawk device, which is typically used for fishing by fishermen. So this is being deployed by Secchi Disc volunteers. And the graph on the right here is tracking the water temperature at depth over time at 1 mid-lake site. So following these changes year after year will help us better understand any just nuanced changes in the thermocline, which is that transition zone that separates the warmer upper waters from the cooler waters below. So thanks to Joel for spearheading this effort this year. So I know I went through a lot of those really quickly. There is a lot that goes into all these programs, as I mentioned. So we just wanted to share a snapshot of all of just the time and effort that goes into this. So here on the left, you'll see not only our citizen science programs all documented by the number of volunteer hours, but we've also included our board dedicated hours as well. And this adds to a total of 6,187 volunteer hours. That is just wild to me. It's incredible. And just if we wanted to put that in perspective, a recent 2022 National Nonprofit Report values the time for skilled volunteers at $29 an hour. So that would actually equate to a value to CLWA of over $179,000. So gosh, volunteerism really is the backbone of CLWA. So I know many of our volunteers are on the call right now. So on behalf of myself and our board of directors, we want to thank you all for your incredible support in providing more eyes on the lake. Okay, now for a final focus area of 2022, partnerships. And we've learned over the years that it takes a village. Protection of the lake requires ongoing support and collaboration with just an array of stakeholders. So we're really proud to partner with the following organizations over this past year alone on projects to help protect the health and the future of the watershed. We mentioned several of them already in passing, and a little later on tonight, we're also going to be hearing more in depth from two partners, one, Tony Prestigiacomo at the DEC, and a little later on, Kevin Albani at the Canandaigua Lake Watershed Council. So on these partnerships, one ongoing partnership that we're really proud to have expanded this past year, the Lake Friendly Living Coalition of the Finger Lakes. We did touch on this last year. It was a relatively new program for us. In 2019, CLWA, we launched our Lake Friendly Lawn Care campaign. And we did it as a way to get residents and municipalities to take action over the amount of harmful fertilizers, pesticides, and contaminants that are going into the lake. And shortly thereafter, many neighboring lake associations also took interest in this program and launched similar efforts. And this map to me really highlights just that there's strength in numbers and how we are all just better working together than any one lake trying to do it alone. Couple other new things on the horizon for us. Since our last annual meeting, we're thrilled to report that we've launched a government relations committee chaired by board member Doug Merrill. And a goal of this group is to really just forge that stronger working relationship with our municipal partners, as this is where a lot of the decision-making happens at the local level. On the top right, you'll see an image here of board members Doug and Ellen Palomini presenting to the Town of Gorham board last week. And this is part of a town board meeting tour that they've been taking to not only just share our concerns, but build consensus about what is right for lake health. Another great example of partnerships in action over this last year is the many organizations that came together for the first boat wash station at the Canandaigua Lake State Marine Park. So this initiative was really spearheaded by Canandaigua City Council, but really quickly gained traction to bring together so many different partners that we've listed here across the region to get it done, all for the benefit of keeping unwanted invasive species out of the lake. And these partnerships, they also just translate to our local business community. Thanks to a really successful business membership drive led by our membership team, Sue Martinson, Jody Kaufman, and Ellen Palomini, we have seen a big uptick in the number of business members by 300% in the last couple of years. It's really incredible. And we're working with many of these new members to collaborate and just connect about environmental issues in the area. Top right image is an example. We recently held a rain barrel workshop at the Naples Brewing Company back in July. It was a really great opportunity to support a new local business, and they were really interested in what they can do to spread the word about healthy land and clean water with their patrons. So we're really thrilled to be able to do something like that, and we look forward to doing more of it in the future. And we've also become really involved with the Finger Lakes Regional Watershed Alliance. Again, building on that collective strengthening voice. We've been participating with their political education committee. And lastly, two other new projects this year included a partnership with Ontario County Soil and Water Conservation District on hemlock woolly adelgid management. And coming this fall, you're going to see announcements. Treatments will be occurring at Grimes Glen in the Naples area to help protect those hemlock trees in this critical kind of stream, steep slope area. And we're going to be continuing these surveys for private landowners in the fall and throughout the winter, with the ultimate goal of working towards prioritizing areas in the watershed, even on private lands that could benefit from treatments. So if you are looking for a survey, please contact the office. We'd be happy to come down and take a look. And last, but really just certainly not least, this year we're working with our friends at the Finger Lakes Land Trust on a series of activities to engage families in outdoor exploration. And really, we just want to enhance their local connection, the connection to our local landscape here. And our next event is going to be held up at Bear Hill in partnership with Canandaigua and the Finger Lakes Land Trust on Saturday, October 1st. So check out our website for more details. Think about bringing your kids or maybe even your grandkids. Okay, so that was really just a high level kind of quick overview of several of our key areas this past year, but we have limited time and we just still have so much to share with you all. So please consider this a formal invitation to attend our open house event on Thursday, September 8th. It's going to run from 5 to 7 p.m. and it's going to be held here at the CLWA office, but most activities are going to happen at the Farmers Market Pavilion here on Mill Street. So please join us. We want to continue this conversation with you all. We're going to have tables highlighting each of our activities and our different programs. And we're just going to have more time to connect and chat and share information. So feel free to come on down. We look forward to just your involvement. And we really want to hear from you, our members and supporters, about what you care about and what you want to see more of. So we hope you'll consider joining us on Thursday, September 8th. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to transition to the next part of our program. And at this time, I'm going to introduce our CLWA treasurer, Linda Dvorak, who's going to go through our treasurer's report. Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Lindsay. We can go to my first slide. I'm going to be delivering a quick report on the financial health of CLWA. And this chart has a lot of information in it. It's showing a 5-year trend on our income. So that's funding sources is what the income is. 2021 was a strong year for membership for us, both in an increased number of members and an increased average membership donation. So both things contributed to a big growth in the membership dollars that we are showing in our graph. We also benefited, as Lindsay mentioned, from a strong membership, a business membership campaign that we implemented, and that came in very well. So businesses supporting our mission is not a new area, but it's definitely a new highlight for us. And lastly, the success that I'll mention the success of our flare conversion, where Wegmans was able to donate $1 for each one sold to us. It was really a nice way to reinforce the fact that we came up with the idea and we were driving that for the membership and for the lake. I think we can hop to the next page, which is our expenses. And I'm moving there. That's the other half of the coin. So, we take money in and we spend money. So as we started to recover from COVID, our Keystone Education Program and our educators were cleared to come back to the schools. And so we saw the spending start to go back up there, and we'll definitely see a lot more of that in 2022. We also saw more activities driven by volunteers. Lindsay mentioned a number of them, and supported by our small staff. So we entered year 2 of our strategic framework, and that is starting to drive an increase in our spending. Although as you look at it, it's just the beginning of the ramp. We also provided the necessary local matching funds for the Watercraft Steward Program that protects the lake from invasive species that might be entering through our public launch areas. So those are the key highlights. What I would say overall to sum up our financial picture is that 2021 showed a real recovery to what is a more typical pattern for us, and it's resulted in a financially healthy organization. These slides will be available if somebody wanted to deep dive into them and really look at it. There's a lot of information here online, so don't feel like you have to try to take this all in right in this moment. But and then you could always send us questions if you have any questions. Thanks, Lindsay.
So before we move on to Wade, could I make a motion that we accept the treasurer's report?
So moved.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And
good evening, everyone. It's time for a little business. We have some voting to do here. Tonight, we will vote on a slate of board members. If we could pull up that slate, please. There we go. We have 1 new and 3 renewing board members. And we're going to be voting as a slate all together, not individually. From the town of South Bristol, new to our board, but not new to the organization, is Susan Martinson. Renewing will be our fabulous treasurer, Linda Dvorak, from the town of Canandaigua, Joel Pasternak, the town of Gorham, and Ellen Palomini, the city of Canandaigua. All 4 board members' terms will end in 2025. We have 3-year terms for our board. And I believe we're going to put up a quick poll. Very good. So if you would please just take a moment to vote yay or nay, and we will tabulate the results and give you just a minute before we proceed.
There's still a few votes rolling in, so we'll give it maybe 30 more seconds here. 30, 52, can you see that? Okay, last call for votes. Okay, we're going to close it now. Thank you, Wade.
Great. Now we'll move into our awards, our recognitions, awards and recognitions that we do annually. Tonight we have 3 awards to present, and I'm going to kick it off before turning it back over to Lynn. Our first award is the CLWA Bud Rohr Stewardship Award. And this year we are very proud to honor Jack Daly with our annual Stewardship Award. Jack is retiring from the board after serving the organization and one of its predecessors for nearly 20 years. It is difficult to express the positive impact Jack has had on getting CLWA to where it is today. He helped guide the new organization through growing pains, including the hiring of our first employee, Lindsay McMillan. Jack is a past president of CLWA and has served on many committees over the years. In addition, Jack has served the community as a member of the town of Gorham and Ontario County Planning Boards. He was also a member of the working group that helped create model laws for on-site wastewater treatment and steep slope development, recently adopted by local municipalities. Jack had a successful career in corporate finance and recently moved to Canandaigua from Gorham with his wife, Joan. He has agreed to continue serving on several CLWA committees, so it's good to know that Jack will still be out there serving our lake and community. Thank you, Jack. On behalf of the board, we will miss you and wish you and Joan all the best. Lynn?
Actually, that one's me. So for our next recipient here, we are proud to honor Jody Kaufman as CLWA's Volunteer of the Year. And as we talked about earlier, CLWA has so many dedicated, skilled volunteers, and it's our privilege to share this inaugural Volunteer of the Year award with one of our longtime supporters and clean water advocates, Jody Kaufman. Jody served on the CLWA board from 2014 to 2017 and was brought on by past board member Tom Harradine after the two got to know each other at Rotary. Jody's background leading sales teams at AT&T in Southern California gave her a real advantage in relationship building in the community. During her board service, she joined our membership committee and was always the first one to roll up her sleeves to help write fundraising letters, to stuff envelopes, or go door to door for an in-kind donation. Oftentimes she'd drag along her husband, Rick, too. There was no job too big or too small for Jody. After leaving the board, she has remained committed to helping CLWA, having helped run a successful business member outreach campaign in the fall of 2021, which is, we've reported earlier tonight, more than just double the number of CLWA business members. And she's also helped cultivate new lasting connections for the organization. Jody's no-nonsense approach and get it done attitude have been just a tremendous asset to not only CLWA, but through her other volunteer efforts, including Rotary, the Literacy Volunteers of Ontario County, and the Canandaigua Democrats. On behalf of our board of directors and myself, we want to thank Jody and her wonderful husband, Rick, for their countless hours dedicated to furthering the CLWA mission. Thanks, Jody.
I agree. Thank you both, Jody and Jack. The Canandaigua Lake Watershed Association is honoring Dr. Lisa Kleckner with the 2022 Partner in Protection Award. Lisa's academic studies began at Colgate University, where a class she took in freshwater algae ignited her passion to pursue a long and fruitful career studying both environmental health and water quality and the relationship between the two. Lisa has a well-stocked CV or resume and has successfully secured more than $3.5 million from federal, state, and nonprofit organizations. Her research and educational efforts collaborate with a variety of audiences, including students, professional scientists, community members, government agencies, and businesses. Lisa and her team are responsible for the lab at FLI in Geneva, receiving New York State certification for ELISA toxin testing. Most importantly, Dr. Kleckner has been a big part of our citizen or community science projects, starting with our volunteer HABS shoreline monitoring program in 2018, analyzing samples with great turnaround time while responding promptly to our many questions. And that's why CLWA is awarding Dr. Kleckner. Her depth of knowledge and willingness to share that knowledge with our citizen science team has been invaluable and directly correlated to the growth of our citizen science efforts. That is the definition of partnership in my world. Lisa has also graciously connected us with other researchers at SUNY Binghamton and Fredonia and Cornell University. Through her collaborative efforts, CLWA is facilitating more Canandaigua Lake-based research than ever before, especially these last 3 years. While she wasn't able to join us live tonight, she did let me know in advance how much she loves working with community scientists, learning from the CLWA volunteers who possess a diverse professional background, and is very motivated to see that science is guiding decision-making for public health. We thank you, Dr. Kleckner, for your professional guidance and support. And now I think our first presenter is, oh, I'm sorry. We go to Katrina.
Me first.
Katrina first.
Yeah.
Thanks, Katrina.
For sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to continue on with this awards and recognitions, and I am going to focus on the photo contest awards. So this year, just like you would have heard in the past, our focus is views from the watershed. And it's so incredible to see what our constituents share. It's amazing to see what the entrants have. And there's a criteria that we use for judging. Lindsay, on the next slide. And I'm here in the office with Lindsay, if you see me look up. Lindsay, next slide. Anyways, so we had 3 awesome judges this past week who reviewed nearly 200 entries this year. And they went through one by one and judged based on degree of creativity, overall aesthetics in the photography, and the representation of the watershed, because the name of the contest is all about views from the watershed. So using those 3 judging criterias, tonight we're going to announce 3 honorable mentions, and then 3rd place, 2nd place, and then 1st place. So starting off with the first honorable, oh, actually, I forgot about this one, most votes. So what we added a couple years ago is this ability for the public to vote and give who they feel is the most deserving. And this entry this year, if you want to go on, received over 50 votes. And this was called Serenity by Linda Double. So congratulations for getting all your friends and family to love this beautiful photo, which I personally love as well. I would love a canvas print of this in my home. But thank you very much, Linda, for winning most popular. All right, now on to our 3 honorable mentions. The first one is boathouses. Now, this one is from Steve Barsnell. And, you know, over the years, we see a lot of boathouses, but what the judges really loved about this one was the unique capture of them, the framing, the trees, the beautiful sky. So congratulations on your honorable mention, Stephen. All right, second honorable mention we have. This one is called Rainbow Fields by Gina Crutter, excuse me. And this one, the judges were looking at and felt that it just was so gorgeous, the way the rainbow hit right on that barn, and a unique one in that it wasn't actually showing the water, but in fact, part of the watershed. So let's go on to our last honorable mention, Lindsay, thank you. And this one, look at that. This one is called Even Kids Need a Play Break by Leslie Rice. This adorable young child looking out, probably done from playing on the playground over at Kershaw and having time to look over the water, the future generations of our watershed. All right, so those were our honorable mentions. Now on to 3rd place. Okay. I'll have you look at this one. This, the judges really loved, first of all, because it's now showing a winter scene. Often you see, you know, the beautiful lake in the summer days, but we know our lake can be used for year-round recreation. So this one, called Ice Sailing on Canandaigua by Diane Dersch, had a very journalistic appeal with the winter adventure and a timeless look. You look at this photo and it could have been from 20 years ago or from yesterday. It was so timeless in the way that it was captured. So congratulations on your 3rd place win. All right, 2nd place, get ready for this one, everybody. Look at this face. All right, this is Canandaigua Lake kneeboarding from Ben McKeegan. Always say playful enjoyment, clean air, clean water, and summertime fun that this young boy is able to enjoy here on Canandaigua Lake. So congratulations on your 2nd place win, Ben. All right, now we're up to 1st place. Here we are. This one just drew so much emotion from our judges. You look at this sunset in Canandaigua Lake from Jib Goldammer, and it's the peaceful aspect. It's the serene feeling. It's the meditative view that we all love about our watershed. So 1st place, there it is, our honorable mentions, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. We're going to be announcing all of these winners on social media tomorrow, and we'll be reaching out to them directly to give them their fun prizes. So thank you for everyone who entered and voted, and see you next year. Thanks, guys.
Okay, you're good. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Katrina. Those were some really just incredible images. So now it's time to get into our keynote presentation tonight. I'm thrilled to introduce Tony Prestigiacomo. Tony is a research scientist with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Finger Lakes Watershed Hub, where he focuses on watershed and water quality issues specific to the Finger Lakes region. Prior to the hub, he worked as a scientist at the Upstate Freshwater Institute in Syracuse, focusing on the monitoring and assessment of lakes, reservoirs, and streams. watershed nutrient loading, and transport and fate of stream inputs to New York State lakes. This work included assessment of the Eastern Finger Lakes, data collection and analysis for water quality model development, monitoring New York City reservoirs, and long-term monitoring of Onondaga Lake. So we're thrilled to welcome Tony Prestigiacomo. And Tony, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Okay.
So that hopefully you can pull yours up. Give us a few moments, everybody. Get situated here.
Can you hear me okay? Is my audio good?
Hear you great, yep.
So it's not giving me permission yet. Oh, maybe now. There we go.
There you go.
How's that? Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, looks good, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Well, thank you, Lindsay, for the nice introduction. It's very nice to be here virtually, although I do miss it in person, maybe next year. Thanks again. I'm going to talk through my research project from 2019. I think I presented preliminary results in 2019, 3 years ago already. So the data has been it's being worked up. And so now I can share with you some of the findings officially. So I'm going to start out with, strangely, I'm going to start out with thank yous first, because I always tend to run a little long and I don't want to miss this opportunity. A research project like this does not get done without the help of many, many people, including the funding support that was given to accomplish the study. So I'd like to thank my Finger Lakes Watershed Hub colleagues, Amy and Lou, and Scott Cook, now retired, my other DEC colleagues for helping secure the funding and kind of data wrangling and data management. I'd like to thank the manuscript that's coming out of this work, the first one, there might be two, we'll see. The manuscript co-authors at the DEC and the Department of Health. And I wanna make sure that I thank the New York State Department of Health for all of their help working up the manuscript in a hopefully meaningful way. You know, how the technical side of the results from the lake itself manifested in impacts both to recreation, beach closures, and public water supply, raw waters. It was a great collaboration with Jim and Courtney at the Department of Health, one that doesn't happen frequently with the DEC, and the data sharing was extremely valuable as well. And of course, the Canandaigua Lake Watershed Association and Watershed Council as well for, again, the HABS surveillance networks, data sharing, idea collaboration. It all adds up to the work that you're going to see here in a few minutes. So I'm gonna dive right in. As we all know, water quality in the Finger Lakes is generally pretty good for most of the Finger Lakes most of the time. What you're looking at here is a bar chart of total phosphorus. Total phosphorus is usually the nutrient that we're mostly worried about in terms of controlling algal growth in the Finger Lakes. And what you can see is a bar chart for all of 11 lakes, moving from Canisius here on the far left all the way to Atisco here on the far right. And you can see the bars are various shapes and sizes depending on the lake from 2017 to 2018. And historically, when we talk about cyanobacteria impacts and HABs in lakes, we really weren't worried about lakes if they had phosphorus under 30 micrograms per liter or 0.03 milligrams per liter. Those lakes with phosphorus levels above this red line were those kind of at higher risk for HABs, and those below were not quite so at risk. But we're here in this new world where, you know, lakes like Canandaigua that have total phosphorus summer averages of around 6 micrograms per liter are having cyanobacteria impacts and HAB impacts. And so the Finger Lakes are definitely lakes that are impacted by HABs. Here is a table, and I updated it while we were talking. I'm sorry to add the question mark to Canandaigua here, but these are reported HABs through the DEC NIHAB system in the Finger Lakes from 2012 on your far right of the table to current year 2022 on the far left. And the X's represent reported HABs in each of the Finger Lakes over that time period, over that 10 or 11 year period. And you can see a lot of lakes in the Finger Lakes are having HABs year after year, some not quite so much so like Canada's Lake, but but even low nutrient lakes like Canandaigua, Keuka, Skinny Atlas even are having HABs. So this talk is designed around presenting the results of my research project in 2019, but I decided to throw in a slide to just talk about HABs and low nutrient lakes in general, because I know that we don't get a chance to talk about these things often, but I thought it would be useful just to go through it. So cyano-HABs do occur in low nutrient lakes. The causes are complicated. There's an ever-growing literature out there from New York State, from the rest of the United States, Europe, about low nutrient lakes that are having HABs. The causes are complicated. I have a few references I can share with you. But from New York State research, from our HABs action plans from 2018, which did include 5 finger lakes, not Canandaigua, but Skinny Atlas, Owasco, and Cayuga, we identified 4 important factors for HABs in New York lakes. They were high phosphorus levels, lake orientation. So those with a north-south orientation were more likely to have HABs than other lakes. Maximum fetch length. This is the uninterrupted length across the surface of a water body that a wind can act on. So long lakes are more likely to have occurrences of shoreline HABs in New York. And the presence of invasive dry-sended mussels, so zebra mussels and quagga mussels, are also more likely to have HABs in low nutrient lakes. And so if you look at the 4 factors, many of the finger lakes, Canandaigua included, they meet these 3 criteria here: lake orientation, fetch length, and dry-sended mussels. And so those are undoubtedly some of the reasons why we're starting to see HABs in lakes like Canandaigua. Phosphorus levels are not overly high in Canandaigua. In fact, they're quite low. But if we get time, we can talk about why controlling phosphorus through watershed planning is still the best option that we have. And so cyano-HABs their impacts are critical in oligotrophic or low nutrient systems, because these lakes, as you well know, and from the photos we just saw, are used for a variety of important purposes. They're used as public water supplies, they're used in recreation, aesthetics, property value, etc. So, HABs impacting these low nutrient systems is a big deal. But they represent monitoring and assessment challenges as well. I mean, big lakes like Canandaigua are, well, they're big, right? The HABs are not uniform in space and time. They're not uniform on the long axis of the lake or the short axis or with depth. So monitoring for HABs and cyanobacteria impacts can represent a challenge, which was one of the things I was hoping to accomplish with this study. I'm not going to take too much time. We all know Canandaigua Lake has reports of HABs in the surface waters. They've had reported microcystin in the raw water of public water supplies. And so some of the questions that I was looking to answer with this study was, can we monitor for HABs indicators in the open water where concentrations are generally low with the tools that we have? Can we answer some questions about that, with the instrumentation and the analytical tests at our disposal? And so the other thing is, we're all kind of aware that cyano-HABs form or are observable in the surface waters. How are they getting to the lower depths? Are they being formed in the upper waters and being transported down through circulation? Are they forming in the lower waters and being mixed upward? Or are they forming in the nearshore region, being transported to the open water regions and then downward? So these questions and others were ones that I was hoping to tackle with this research. And so the objectives, really quickly, were to use combinations of monitoring tools to document cyano-HABs and cyano-HAB indicators. And the important word for this first objective is systematically. The nearshore observations of shoreline occurrences and skim sampling, they're fantastic at monitoring impacts, but I wanted to tackle this systematically through space and time to see if we could resolve a timeline. Where were the HABs forming first? Could we see them in the open water before nearshore? What were the concentrations in the open water that translated to nearshore impacts? Things like that. And so to use that systematically collected data set to tease out impacts in the lake, both on the surface and at depth, And then thirdly, I was interested in starting to look at the relationships between cyanohab indicators, and the indicators, you'll hear me use that term quite a bit. I'm talking about total chlorophyll, fluoroprobe cyanobacteria chlorophyll, Secchi disk, turbidity, factors that we routinely measure in HABs research. And so the systematic approach, the study design looked like this. This is a top view map of Canandaigua Lake, as you can tell. The sites in panel B here represent both the measurements that I collected in the open water. So these circles here, kind of in the main part of the lake that form like that upside down T, which were done for 8 visits systematically from June through the end of October in 2019. The symbols near shore represent different areas where we assessed impacts. So the triangles are regulated New York State Department of Health beaches. The stars are New York State Department of Health public water supplies or community water supplies for Canandaigua. And so looking at how things change in the open water and how they impacted the shoreline will be a big focus of what I talk about tonight. And C is a zoomed in area of all the different sites that I measured as part of my study, moving from the C-SLAP North site, which Lindsay talked about a little bit here in the south, moving northward to site T4, which is just off the swimming area of Kershaw Beach, and a transect that worked west to east across Canandaigua Lake from this site here in the west to this site here in the east. And of course, the HAB surveillance shoreline areas that all the great volunteers monitor routinely for HABs kind of circle the shoreline in various areas. And so if you take that map and you kind of turn it on its side and you slice it down the long axis of the lake, this is what this side view is describing in terms of what was collected where for this study. And so you can see a bunch of different sites, the C-SLAP North site, T1, T2, T3, moving from, again, south to north, from deep water to shallow water. This line represents the water surface. And what we did was we collected both discrete samples with Kemmerers or Van Dorns, just like the C-SLAP volunteers do to measure their samples from the surface waters. So right here at the very surface in the lake's upper waters, the Epilimnion, here at the thermocline depth, which changed depending on the survey date, but the thermocline is that area of very rapid changing temperature that separates the upper waters from the lower waters during stratification. We collected samples in the lower waters and right near the bottom as well to kind of fully capture that water column profile, right? And we sampled for fluoroprobe samples, chlorophyll, nutrients, microcystin. These dashed lines represent very detailed vertical profiles with instrumentation. So we used an XO2 and a BBE algae torch, and we basically, well, we didn't basically, we taped them together, hooked them to a data logger and lowered it very slowly from the very water surface to the very lake bottom to see what we could see vertically with regards to patterns of indicators. And when I talk about patterns that we did find in the results, when I talk about surface waters, I'm going to be talking about kind of this combination of surface samples and epilimnetic samples. An interesting finding that we had was that there was no difference between the concentrations of any parameter between the surface integrated samples and these samples in Epilimnion 2 meters below the water surface. And part of that is because we, given the discrete nature of the sampling events, we didn't time it right with a big surface bloom HAB. So again, the field methods and lab methods, these are ones at our disposal already. We use the fluoroprobe to get at total chlorophyll samples. And then the fluoroprobe is a great instrument that gives us 4 functional algal groups, the drenes, the diatoms, the cryptos, and what we were primarily interested here were the cyanobacteria numbers. We collected chlorophyll for regular laboratory analysis to compare against the fluoroprobe. We collected total microcystins, this MC, via the ELISA method. We collected nutrients, general water quality perceptions, and Secchi disk measurements. And again, field measurements with the instruments shown here. And part of this doesn't usually happen in scientific presentations, but I'm just going to throw this out there. I can definitely support it later, but I can tell you that the field and lab methods that we use, they all worked. And so the study design was extremely successful at capturing not all impacts from cyanobacteria, but the impacts enough to resolve and answer the objectives of the questions. And I didn't want to kind of spend the time here going through the kind of inner working details of, you know, how the field sensors compare to the lab sensors and the things that kind of have to happen behind the scenes to get the profiles to kind of look nice and show the corrected patterns. But just know that those did work. I have those available. They will be published as supplemental materials in the manuscript that's being generated. And I can't overstate kind of how big of a victory this part was, the study design and kind of these tools. Because going into it, you know, we knew that lakes like Canandaigua were having HABs, but we didn't really know, or at least I didn't really know what to expect about kind of the systematic measurement of these things kind of in the upper waters and at depth, whether they were going to give us usable numbers at all. So I won't overstate it, but I'm extremely happy at how well that these methods worked. One thing that I'll try to touch back on time and time again, but multiple data sets were critical at meeting the objectives of the study. The transect surveys, you know, that systematic approach that the DEC enacted to meet the objectives, the profiles, and the discrete sampling, you know, they were great. They're a lot of work, really good at resolving patterns in the open water. But the existing programs that already are enacted on Canandaigua, the shoreline HABs reporting from the Lake Association, the Watershed Council, and others, the Department of Health programs that regulate beach closures, monitoring, and you know, sampling for microcystin and other things in public water supplies. All of those were very, very critical at getting the kind of the whole picture of 2019 Canandaigua Lake HABs. And so I love to show this picture of me getting soaked with my intern Max here. This was the August 7th survey date. I'd like to show this to my bosses because I want them to know that I wasn't just out on Canandaigua having a great time in the sunshine. All right, so I'm going to dive into some of the surface patterns and we'll move ahead. So I'm going to show you a few series of plots here, like the panel here off to the left with the chlorophyll A title. These are box and whisker plots. And what this is showing, so as an example, the June box here at the far left, the height of the box and the dots within it contain all of the surface water measurements from the sampling sites from the map in the upper right-hand corner. So think of the height of the box as representing kind of the spread in conditions that were observed during that one survey date in the surface waters. Okay, does that make sense? And so what you can see, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to add kind of the lake study area average line there in green. And so you can see that in June and July, you know, we see, you know, low chlorophyll conditions, fairly homogeneous conditions across the study area. Starting in August 7th, here you get a little bit of a uptick in total chlorophyll. Mid-August is when we saw peak chlorophyll conditions in the lake. This was August 18th, this was August 27th. It's peak in terms of the average condition in the lake, and it's also peak in terms of the variability in the study area as well. After August, so kind of into September and October, you get kind of that seasonal decline in the production where the chlorophyll decreases to lower and lower concentrations until kind of the end of October here. The concentrations of chlorophyll were very similar to what they were in June and July. And so nothing too surprising here. These numbers, you know, they get big for Canandaigua. They're not overly large compared to the statewide database, but definitely impacting the lake in terms of water quality in the season. One thing I'm not going to show here, but it's very encouraging with regards to research for cyanobacteria, chlorophyll, and water quality impacts in lakes like Canandaigua, was that the turbidity probe on our XO package tracked the chlorophyll signature extremely well. And so the use of turbidity, you know, turbidity doesn't always just track chlorophyll. We need to be careful about that. It does track sediment and other things, whiting events. But the fact that it was so highly correlated with chlorophyll is really encouraging for its use in monitoring water quality from chlorophyll A. And so what are we talking about in terms of the June and kind of peak impact conditions, right? So here's a photo I took of one of the sites on June 6th, and you get that really clear blue water that we all we all recognize on Canandaigua Lake. And then peak impact August 22nd. You see this kind of the green, kind of murky. You can see some of the dots in the water here too, if you look close enough. And so I really appreciate the surface photography. I took time at every site on every trip to photo document, just to document the conditions and see what they look like. And I found that contrast was really striking. So moving on with surface patterns, again, kind of the same type of plot, but this time for the cyano chlorophyll A channel from the fluoroprobe. One thing you should notice is the concentrations are lower than the total chlorophyll, which is expected, but the overall seasonality of the pattern is basically the same. And so the cyanos, are extremely low in June and July. We start to pick them up in the open water sites here, kind of in August. Peak impacts here, kind of mid to late August, and then decline throughout the season. And I'm going to click, and I just added a brown line, and those were the results of the microcystin concentrations. And so the microcystin wasn't one-to-one all the time, but the microcystin concentration from the discrete samples tracked the cyanobacteria measurements very, very closely. It also tracked the turbidity signature very closely and the chlorophyll signature very closely. All of that is very interesting, of course. It's also going to be very, very useful with regards to monitoring lakes like Canandaigua moving forward. And I'll talk a little bit more about that moving on. And so what does that add up to? So all those surface water patterns are really interesting to resolve. The timing is really cool. But what does that mean with regards to recreational impacts or impacts for shoreline users? And so I'm not sure if you can see the heading, but what this 6-panel graph here is showing is recreation impacts the week of August 12th, 19th, 26th on the top, September 2nd, September 9th, and September 16th on the bottom. And the cyano chart is the same one that you just saw with a little arrow documenting the week of the August 19th. So in the open water on that week, we were able to resolve that the open water concentrations here at these sites range from 2 to 6 micrograms per liter, right, from the fluoroprobe measurements. And that those open water impacts result in the beach closures, which are the triangles here, and the onshore HABS observations from the Canandaigua Lake Watershed Association HAB surveillance program here. And so what we know, what this kind of confirms is that the kind of the low-ish concentrations of cyanos in the open water, once magnified downwind and downstream, can result in concentrations that are extremely variable, but often much, much higher than the impacts in the open water. And then as an example, September 16th, just kind of confounding, how we monitor for HABs in the open water and what it means with near shore. The study wasn't perfect after all, but if you look at the concentrations here on September 16th, the open water concentrations are all 1 microgram per liter-ish, 1.25. And we still had this amount of cyanobacteria onshore accumulations on this date in September 16th. So it does not take much of a concentration in the open water to get magnified downstream to impact nearshore uses. And these photos are great. Thanks again, Lindsay, Kevin, Doug Turnbull for the aerial photo, documenting kind of the impacts that happen with the open water concentrations that we were able to measure. All of these photos were taken on August 20th. This in the open water with an aerial photo showing the kind of the HABs impacts in the surface waters. I think August 20th was the only open water bloom that was recorded that year. But just how variable this is as it interacts with shoreline areas, here, much higher here, kind of intermittent here, but then here it was perfectly blue without a trace of cyanobacteria impacts. So it certainly is a challenge in these big lakes, even if you get a handle on what's happening in the open water and have very good dedicated shoreline observers, knowing where and when they're going to impact isn't always easy. All right, patterns at depth. And I know I'm going very quickly here, giving you a very, very fast recall. The paper that's being written goes into more details in all of these things. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you once it's published. And so we used we used common tools for limnology to assess impacts at depth. Here's my fantastic intern Max with one of our XO2 instruments. He's since moved on, but this project would not have gotten done without Max. I gave him basically all of the sampling logistics to prepare for it. He took care of it for me. It would not have happened without Max. So kudos to him. And collecting the discrete samples here with a Kemmerer bottle. And the patterns at depth, the instruments and the measurements provide a lot of power to characterize and understand the system. But as I'll get to at the end, the surface impacts, as we can tell with our naked eyes, are extremely powerful too. And so if you take up all the profiles that were done with the instruments and the discrete samples, and you plot them up, you get a figure that looks like this, right? And so this figure is in the manuscript. I'm going to leave it up here for 32 seconds while you all memorize it, because there is a quiz at the end about what happened at LI1E on August 22nd at 10 meters. No, I'm obviously kidding. We're going to focus in on a few highlights here, but I just wanted to give you a feel for kind of the volume of data and the things that you can learn, with a systematic study that employs, multiple metrics. And the paper goes into these vertical patterns in much more detail. So I'm going to boil this down to two major findings, and I'm going to show you some examples. This is a set of vertical profiles from the water surface here at 0 meters down to just over 50 meters at the Sea Slap North location, right? For each panel represents a date from June through the end of October. Each of the lines of the water quality indicators are indicated here. So the dotted is chlorophyll, the black is the cyanos, the circles are the microcystin concentrations, and the gray is the turbidity. I know it's a lot. I'm going to boil it down. And this horizontal line, dashed blue line, represents the depth of the thermocline. So that depth where the temperature changes rapidly, as measured with a thermometer. And so kind of the major finding number one, I'm going to point your eye to the higher but uniform-ish concentrations of all of the indicators above the thermocline. So starting on August 7th, when we start to see kind of the tick up in chlorophyll and cyanos and microcystin, August 22nd, September 5th, September 19th, with the vertical profiling instrument and the samples, we were able to demonstrate that the impacts were higher and relatively uniform above the thermocline. Below the thermocline, so that barrier that prevents mixing of the upper waters to lower waters because of thermal stratification, you got much lower concentrations of all the indicators. And another thing that we didn't see, which was interesting, was we didn't see any increases in any of the indicators below the thermocline. So we didn't see, for example, any deeper chlorophyll layers, forming in here that may have led us to think something different about how and where the cyano bloom was forming. Ooh, sorry about that. So what that tells me is the chlorophyll A, so the algae, the cyanos appear to be forming above the thermocline, and they're well mixed in the waters above the thermocline, which tends us to think that they're originating in the upper waters. And I showed you here for one site. The story was similar for all of these other sites that were deep enough to stratify. So basically T2 and the transects here at site 1. And the other thing that is encouraging is all of these indicators kind of track each other extremely closely. So if you were to measure one of these things, you would know information about all the others without having to measure them, which is important, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So that's number one. Major finding number two, again, it's the same sort of style of graph. It's two different sites. It's the transect 1 west and east site here, as shown on the map, for just 3 dates, August 7th, August 22nd, and September 5th. One thing you can see is the increase in the concentrations of all the indicators above the thermocline between the 7th and the 22nd, right? So we went from just starting to measure things at a detectable level here in August, early August, to 2.5 weeks later, 2 weeks later, having peak impact in the lake in waters above the thermocline. So you can see that very well. We were able to track that and pick that up with our measurements. So again, same sort of thing, right? High concentrations above the thermocline, low concentrations below the thermocline. Now, they weren't all below detection. but they were very, very low and very much lower than the upper waters. And so the neat thing was, and we were able to capture this, and I count myself kind of lucky, but somewhat prepared too, was that when you look from August 22nd to September 5th, what you can notice is that thermocline line that was present here on the 22nd is gone at these two sites on the 5th. So basically what happened was, in these 2 weeks, the thermocline deepened enough to be below the maximum depth at these sites. There still was a thermocline at the deeper sites, but these shallow sites, because of seasonal mixing, were basically completely mixed from top to bottom, from water surface to 15 meters or 45 feet. So when they fully mixed, we get an increase over this 2-week period of all of the indicators at depth in Canandaigua, right? So you're seeing, tenfold increases in microcystin, as an example, at the 15-meter depth from the 22nd of August to September 5th, by virtue of that thermocline barrier being gone at these sites. And so what that shows me, or what tells me, is that the cyanohabs are being, forming the upper waters, and they're being mixed downward because of circulation or mixing events. And so the impacts at depth, and in the paper, there's a few other figures where I was able to utilize all of the great Department of Health data at the various intakes that they have, do some statistical tests to kind of show this and kind of really hammer the point home. But the impacts at depth that we were able to show were that the cyanos and the microcystin were significantly higher above the thermocline. This is a generic example, right? In the upper waters where they're forming, compared to below the thermocline. And so in this kind of hypothetical lake, with the thermocline intact, you're probably not getting much of a cyanohab impact below the thermocline. But the depth impacts that we did observe depended on the upper water cyano concentrations, the thermocline depth, and the sampling depth, or in the case of an intake, the intake depth. And so once that thermocline goes away, if the bloom or the cyano indicators are concentrated enough in the upper waters, when they mix, even at sites that are 45 feet deep, you can get signals at depth just by virtue of that kind of complete mixing of the water column. And so I'm going to resolve the timeline for you really quickly. And so in June and July in Canandaigua, there were no measured impacts either in the open water or on shore. August 7th was the first cyanobacteria and microcystin detected in the open water. August 12th and August 13th was the first shore bloom observations from the Canandaigua Lake Watershed Association. And 1 day later was the first regulated beach closure by Department of Health. So the fact that these two metrics of impact are aligning so closely was really encouraging, right? The fact that the data that comes across from multiple venues are capturing and helping make decisions on how to utilize the lake, it's fantastic. August 18th and 22nd were the highest open water impact monitored through the transect survey, the intensive survey. August 19th was the first raw public water supply microcystin detect. Now it was low, and it wasn't at all intakes, but it was above detection. August 20th was the first kind of big open water bloom recorded from Canandaigua that year, and so it kind of lends me to believe that as the cyanos and the chlorophyll grow and kind of accumulate in the upper waters, even without a bloom. Use kind of air quotes, a bloom, the stuff is available in the lake to form a bloom if the conditions are right in terms of temperatures or stagnant winds or et cetera. And so October 8th was the last open water detection of microcystin, and October 28th, surprisingly enough, was the last shore bloom observation recorded for Canandaigua that year. And so again, kind of the impacts of a lake doesn't take a lot of cyanobacteria in a big lake to accumulate near shore and create an impact. And I need to make sure I hammer this point home that there were no microcystins detected in the Finnish public water supply waters from Department of Health that year. So the monitoring that they do based on HAB surveillance and what the lake looks like, and the systems they have in place to protect public water supply, Finnish water, they're working. And so this is really exciting. I don't have a lot of time to get into these, but this I think is the next big step that I'm going to try to tackle. What I'm showing you here is an example of a relationship between the cyanobacteria from the fluoroprobe and how it related to the microcystin results for paired samples, right? So you're seeing a scatter plot with kind of the best fit line that shows a high correlation between what we can measure in terms of cyanos in the fluoroprobe and what that can tell us about microcystin concentration from the samples we collected in 2019. And so the chlorophyll A, the cyanobacteria, the turbidity, and microcystin in all the samples were extremely highly correlated. An R of 1 is perfect. They all had an R of 0.8 or higher. Very exciting. Secchi disc measurements we took and the general perception scores that we took were also very highly correlated with all of these other indicators. And I think that's the Secchi disc for the season, the R correlation coefficient was something like 0.7 something with microcystin in Canandaigua, which is amazingly interesting find that I'd like to explore further. And I know you guys do a great job with your Secchi disc program. And there's other Secchi disc data available for different systems. I think that is the next big thing that I'm hoping to tackle. Now, there still is some unexplained variability. These relationships kind of changed a little bit by date. They changed a little bit by position in the water column. All those things are available for further research and further explanation. But the great thing is that because the Transect studies kind of showed that the cyanobacteria impacts are occurring in the open waters, in the upper waters, that our surface measurements, including Secchi discs, C-SLAP, fluoroprobe, are all great indicators to communicate to the public about lake conditions. At least in 2019, like I said, we didn't see any growth or impacts at depth that weren't explained by kind of moving the upper water stuff downward. And so here's a neat little animation of me doing a Secchi disc on August 8th. You can see here the Secchi disc is kind of slowly being lowered, slowly getting harder to see until eventually it's gone due to the kind of the greenness of the water column here. And so in conclusion, the methods and tools that we employed for this project, they all worked. They exist to monitor cyanohabs in large low nutrient stratified lakes. Some are expensive, like the field probes, the microcystin test, and some are cheaper. The user perception surveys and the Secchi disc measurements, but they all in combination can be used to kind of quantify open water impacts because of cyanohabs. The current study, the 2019, the cyanos developed in surface waters, in the open water, not at depth, and that the open water impacts were observed in the absence of, I'll use the kind of classical HABs, is an important finding. And it's also important that we were able to detect signatures of cyanobacteria on the 7th of August, which was a week before beaches and HABs were observed on shore. And so it does seem to support the fact that the stuff is kind of growing in the lake proper and being moved to the shoreline to impact recreation uses there. The shoreline HABs observations that you folks collect correlated very well with beach closures. They were within a day of each other. So, keep on reporting because it's definitely very useful for lots of different stakeholders. And that the impacts at depth were influenced by the cyanos in the upper waters, the depth of the sample, and the depth of the sample relative to the thermocline. And so if it was above the thermocline, the chances of an impact being higher were much, much greater than below. And so of course, this is only one piece of the puzzle, right? It's exciting. There's so much other research going on in Canandaigua, both with FLI and ESF. I'm very excited to throw this data set into the pot and stir it up and see what more we can learn. But in this current study, the analysis of the spatial data might be very useful. That is, were there differences between sites in the surface waters, and what could they tell us about timing? What are the triggers of cyanohabs resulting in open water shore blooms? Is it just the meteorology? One of the nice things about case studies that are really intensive is you can learn a lot about that year. But how these results compare year after year still isn't clear, at least to me. So, but again, we can learn more about Canandaigua moving forward. Investigate the toxicity of cyanohabs in low nutrient systems. Again, the microcystin results from this year were extremely insightful, very interesting. But I think looking at more years data to see if is this a normal case for Canandaigua, it was 2019. At worst case, understanding a bit more about the interannual variability will be important. And finally, additional monitoring and forecasting tools should be advanced to fully evaluate impacts. The study interval that I did on Canandaigua was around 24% of the lake area, which is no small feat. Those were very long field days. We can talk more about that some other time if we have time. But if we want to look at the whole lake, right, as a whole, then we're talking about remote sensing, because there's not enough hours in the day to do the study that I did across the entirety of Canandaigua. To learn about sinohab drivers, that is what's causing sinohabs, and potential controls, and forecasting tools, if they get developed, can provide even more advanced warning to lake users and water supply operators. And that is me. That's all I had for tonight. Thank you very much for your time and attention. That was a very, very quick overview of the study. It was a lot. The paper, I'm not going to be shy. The paper is very long. I would imagine we're going to get critiques about shortening it eventually here, but it was a very detailed study. It represents a lot of work and effort from multiple state agencies, and of course, all of your hard efforts in the CSLAP program and the HAB surveillance folks. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take some questions if there are any.
Yeah, we do have time for, we maybe only have time for 3 questions because we have to move on the agenda.
Yes,
but
yes.
Let me key up a few that we have here that came in first. So this one we might have the answer to pretty quickly. Tony's testing was done in 4 areas near the shallow north end of the lake. What about the other deep water areas of the lake?
Yeah, so yeah, I hit on that a little bit, right? Like just the logistics of such a program kind of limited me to the north end. But it was more than 4. It was, I should know this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it was 7 sites moving from the CSLAP North location, which is kind of near Deep Run area, moving northward. So I did cover some of the deeper areas, but obviously there's a lot of territory south that I couldn't cover in a day.
This is a great question from a former fisheries wildlife tech. How often do you work with the fisheries department at the DEC? Has fisheries within the lakes been looked at closer from a nutrient input standpoint?
Yeah, we interact with the Region 8 fisheries staff quite a bit. Webb Pearsall and his crew. Yeah, they do great work in terms of identifying the dominant phytoplankton and zooplankton in fish. They do nutrient work. The nutrient work that I relied mostly on for this study was through the CSLAP program, and I did take nutrients while I was out there as well. There was no real smoking gun with regards to the nutrients for my study, at least. Lower nutrients in the lower waters, higher in the upper waters. Not a lot of difference between sites. Didn't seem like the nutrient question didn't have a lot of answers with regards to HABs, at least initially. It will be something I dive into now that this kind of preliminary work is done though. So.
Great. We're going to do 2 more, and there's been a few questions about Dresden mussels, zebra mussels, and quagga mussels. So Dr. Kim Schultz has done some work showing that cyanos can vertically migrate at night to feed off phosphorus released by mussels. Do you think night measurements would give you different results? Great question.
Yeah, great question. The short answer is I don't know. I would love to do this at night though. That would be fun. I think it would be a little scary and dangerous, but it would be fun. But I think to really answer the HABs signature questions at depth, that would require probably a different approach. Just the discrete measurements that I was able to do, kind of old school on the kind of the brute force, just getting out there and sampling by hand would be very difficult to do without any sort of automated equipment. What I will say is that the nutrient samples that I collected in the bottom samples, so if you remember that schematic with the kind of the gray circle across at the bottom of all of these sites, I didn't see any increased nutrient signature down there off of the zebra mussel, quagga mussel beds. But again, it's only 7 trips, and I did the best vertically with the equipment that I had. But it certainly could be a good avenue for future research for sure.
Okay, and I have recorded all of these questions here, so whatever we don't get to, Tony, maybe I can send you an email and we can
please
follow up with folks. But one last one here, and I'm just going sort of in order as they're coming in.
Yeah.
Recent research models indicate the need to lower nitrogen with phosphorus. Do you have information on the nitrogen trend in Canandaigua Lake?
Not at the tip of my fingers. I don't know. I'd have to, I guess, read up a little bit more on what that research is specific to Canandaigua. Canandaigua tends to be, well, is limited by phosphorus. I did collect nitrogen series data while I was out. CSLAP does that as well. I think there probably are folks in the room that could speak to more longer term trends on nitrogen in Canandaigua, but you know, the phosphorus trend seems to be fairly stable over time.
Great, and there's so many great questions here, and like I said, I have been recording them, and I'm sorry we can't take all of them, but thank you, Tony, so much for your interesting presentation. I can imagine that there's going to be a lot of interest when this paper comes out, and so we look forward to continuing our work with you and partnership and all the great work that the DEC is doing. So thanks for your time tonight.
Oh, thank you, and I'll keep you up to date as it progresses, but right now it's going to be targeted for a American Waterworks Association special HABS edition this fall for submittal. So we never know where it's going to end up, but that's the plan anyways. And also in the chat to Lynn, I'm putting a website, the DEC's HABS mitigation website. If people are interested, you can share that along too.
That'd be great. Okay, so we have just a few more minutes left, and Kevin has promised me he can be quick, right, Kevin? So I would love to introduce Kevin Alvani, the Watershed Program Manager for the Canandaigua Lake Watershed Council, which consists of publicly elected officials in all 14 municipalities. Kevin has worked for the Watershed Council since 1998 to coordinate the implementation of the Comprehensive Watershed Protection Program. Kevin received a master's degree in water resource management from SUNY ESF and an MBA from Syracuse University. He's been teaching classes in environmental law at Finger Lakes Community College since 2001. Kevin is married to Ann Alvani, who is a Canandaigua middle school teacher, and they have 2 teenage boys, Sean and Patrick, and reside in the town of Canandaigua. So Kevin, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
All right.
And if you want to pull yours up, hopefully this works.
It still says I cannot share screen. Let's see.
Well, let me do this. Try now.
There we go. All right. How's that?
There you go.
Is that showing? Okay, great. All right. So nothing like being last, but I'll try to be quick. Appreciate everybody sticking along with this. Great presentation throughout. Amazing partnerships. What the Watershed Association is doing is amazing. What Lindsay has helped to really, bring about since 2015 when you came on board all the way through. Amazing, and all the volunteer efforts that it's tremendous. And Tony, thank you for all the research you did. I learned a lot tonight. And so we show this slide a lot. What I have up in front of you right now. The Watershed Council are the chief elected officials from the 14 watershed and water purveying municipalities. And we work together. We've been around since 2000, and we work as a coalition to help lead and coordinate the efforts as a program. We look at this as partnership type programs, and I'll talk about those very quickly in terms of some of the projects we've been doing over the last few months to help protect this lake and promote this lake as well. So one of the things in terms of promoting the lake is we received a grant and worked with Ontario County to help put in a handicap accessible kayak launch at Ontario Beach Park. So we got the grant, we hired the engineering design staff to do this, and then helped to coordinate the construction with the county on putting in this handicap accessible kayak launch, which I know is very busy. Here's some of the parking lot improvements, and there's going to be a lot more work out there from a follow-on grant that the county got as well. Another project that we've been able to work on in partnership with the town of Canandaigua and one of the local developers is to permanently protect about 13 acres of riparian buffer along a headwater stream of Sucker Brook, along with the wetland system. So about 13 acres of protection. We created more of a meandering type system and then worked with the developer who put in a 100-foot buffer on either side of the stream and did a bunch of plantings as part of this project. It was a good win-win project with permanent protection in this area. Another thing, actually, I went and visited this site tonight with the rains that we had. It didn't look like the upper left, but this is the County Road 30 site up right near the Civic Center. And this is a picture from last October when it had really engaged about 18-20 acres of water, about 3-4 feet deep. It's one of our water quality basins we put in to try to reduce the nutrient loads and the sediment loads and the bacteria loads going into Canandaigua Lake through natural capital. One of the things we did this spring with the town of Canandaigua and grant funding was to put in a public hiking trail along this that's going to connect both north and south trails. And this is going to be a nice part of that network, and then also be part of a way to view these kind of projects and interact with them that way. Other projects that we've done with the grant monies that we've received, this is South Lake Road, where we had a massive kind of landslide that was going to get worse. And we worked proactively with Middlesex, their engineers, and provided grant funding through one of the grants that we had, that we were able to reallocate funds towards this emergency system. It's called Soil Nailer, to basically stop this 100-foot section of the road bank from collapsing out into the lake, because one, it's adding more sediment load into the lake, but as important and more importantly, it's the only way out for the folks south of this section of the road. So really important to do that aspect. Part of the grant funding that I'll talk about is we did a bunch of road bank stabilization projects around the watershed. Stid Hill Road, South Hill Road, Stid Hills in South Bristol, South Hill is in Middlesex, along with Wolfhanger Road. Here's just one example of many of the projects that we did that were several thousand feet of work in combination. Also, South Lake Road, we did a bunch of drainage improvements and stabilization work there as well. Here's a big project I'll try to take just a few minutes to talk about, but it's a project down in the Naples area. So just to get your coordinates, this is Naples Creek. Here's State Route 21, State Route 245, the Naples Community Park. Here's the big ag field out in that area. And Naples Creek is running north, and ultimately just off the screen, it's emptying into Canandaigua Lake. What we have seen along Naples Creek over the years is that it's been bermed off. It's been through road systems, artificial berms, and we've lost a lot of that natural floodplain action to reduce sediment, reduce nutrient loads going into the lake. So unless it's the most extreme storm events, you don't see a lot of these areas flood. So we want to flood the areas that really need to be flooded to reduce the nutrient load coming in. So all these areas that you see that we've marked on this map are projects to reconnect the natural floodplain into this system. And it's important because 25% of the overall flow that goes into Canandaigua Lake is passing by this project area. So we did 13 plus berm breaks to allow flow to enter the floodplain, new culverts to get water to go out and really slow the water down. Worked with the Nature Conservancy, and they bought 80 acres of land here. We worked with landowners and got another 30 or so acres of land donated in terms of easements to the town of Naples. We did a bunch of these kind of projects. So in combination, we were able to get over a mile of stream length protected and really elongated these flow paths. And that's really important from that perspective, because when you look at this, the project in its totality is able to now take hundreds of millions of gallons that otherwise would be going directly and quickly right into Canandaigua Lake. And we're able to slow that water down and let the natural capital of the system really work. So here's one of the examples of these berm breaks right near Parish Crossroad. We put a bunch of culverts in, another berm break. You can see the lake off in the distance. This water would otherwise be going right out to Naples Creek and right into the lake. We've slowed that water down and made it go through this big wetland system. There's more of a close-up of what it looks like from that perspective. Another project that we just completed over the last couple months with grant funding was one of the things that happens to Naples Creek. It really floods during these larger storm events, and there's debris jams that get formed. We removed some of those major debris jams, and then we also worked in combination with a bunch of folks, and I'll show that picture next. I'll come back to this one. So we just did a project where we reconnected of the natural floodplain by putting in these large culverts right here. This water would otherwise be going and flooding out homes and flooding out the farm field. We're putting it into one of the big ag ditches, and the farmer down there, the Schumachers, agreed and worked with us and donated an easement to allow us to take this water and put it out into natural areas instead of it flooding their farm fields and flooding out homes. So it's not going to solve all the problems down there, but it's part of an overall solution. Here's the Nature Conservancy land, and we took out 3 berms, or the berms along this area, and it now floods this 80-acre area that spring 2018 flood event, there was no flooding out in this Nature Conservancy land. Now looking at this August 2021 drone imagery, with the berm breaks, we now have 80 more acres, a couple feet of water getting stored and treated out in that area and really slowing it down. So these projects really have those kind of impacts. Another grant that we have is $187,000 grant to work with 3 communities to complete an overall salt reduction strategy while maintaining and enhancing road safety. So we're working with highway superintendents in Gorham, Canandaigua, and the city of Canandaigua to institute a pilot program to try to reduce the use of salt and maintain that road system. And it's through live edge plows, through brine systems, and other methods we're going to be using to do that. Where we're getting the funding from, we manage a bunch of grants from New York State. We've been very successful over the years to bring in over $2.5 million. And I'm just showing the most recent of that stretch to do a lot of these projects. And what I just showed you is just, a fraction of a lot of the projects that we're implementing under this grant. The big thing is that second to right column, if you will, from the right, is that local match aspect. So our municipalities play a huge role in providing that local match. The Watershed Association has helped out on a couple of these grants with $10,000 donations towards these projects to help with that local match. But we're able to do a lot of this with $1.3 million in local match to match the grant funding we brought in. A big one we're working on now is this source water protection program to acquire easements and strategic landscapes to even further protect the lake by using natural capital and protecting the land that way. So with that, I hopefully maybe Lindsay in record pace, I was able to go through the projects that I really wanted to give this very important group, the membership of the Watershed Association, an understanding of some of the work that we're doing. And it really, when you look at our program, maybe I'm a little biased, but we really, I think when you look at in totality with what the Watershed Association does and what we're doing in partnership on a lot of these things, we have a good program, but there's obviously still many challenges ahead, as Tony has pointed out in his research. So thank you.
Gosh, thank you, Kevin. And I think that's a really important point that you make. It just, the partnerships, everybody plays a role here. And so looking at that list of projects and seeing those images, like just a really incredible, impressive set of projects that the council was able to do in partnership with our municipalities. And, CLWA doesn't have the capacity for something like that. So how do we work together for the benefit of the watershed as a whole? I think that's really critical. So thanks for spending a few minutes talking about that. We are about 15 minutes over tonight. Do we want to have time for one question? I don't know if anybody has a question for Kevin. Feel free to put it in the chat. In the meantime, I am going to pull up just our tail end slide here. Just give me 1 second. This is the way that you can stay connected with CLWA. So again, we want to invite you to come to our open house event, which is going to be Thursday, September 8th from 5 to 7 p.m. Become a member of CLWA if you're not already. I know some of the folks on this call are members, others are not. We encourage you to join us, join our membership, come to our events, volunteer for a special project, like really stay engaged, get involved. It takes a lot of hands to do this work. So we're just so appreciative of any little bit that you're able to give, whether it be time, financial resources, or whatnot. So thank you all for your time tonight. And Lynn, I'm going to pass it over to you to close out the meeting if there's no other questions for Kevin.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thank you, Kevin and Tony, if you're still on. I wanted to say thank you on behalf of all of the board and our volunteers and our staff. We so appreciate everything you've already done for us. And we are excited to move into the future. And I think we could adjourn the meetings, and we appreciate you all staying so late. So meeting adjourned. Anyone want to make a motion?
So moved, Lynn.
There we go.
All righty. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone. We will see you before next year. Hopefully that will be in person, because we also won't be having an open house. And I'd also like to thank the board for your support my first year as president. So thank you very much. Stay safe, watch the water, and we'll see you on September 8th.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.